This is part 2 of section 2.6, other types of equations. Let's fill in the blanks here. An equation with a rational exponent contains a variable or a variable expression raised to an exponent that is a rational number. Well, we filled that in. Let's take a look at these examples, and I think that might make a little bit more sense. One thing I want to make sure you remember is that you need to use a plus or a minus when you take an even root. Okay, and sometimes you don't realize you're doing it. Remember, these rational expressions have these these rational numbers that are exponents are power over root. Okay, so it's this root that if it's even, we need to use plus or minus. Okay, let's look at this first problem. X to the 3/2 is equal to 216. So our goal is to solve for X. I'm going to write this a little bit larger so you can see the operations. So we're going to raise this to the 2/3 power and this side to the 2/3 power. Now, why did I do that? Because 3/2 multiplied by 2/3 is equal to 1. And we got exactly what we wanted, X to the first power. We won't write first, but you can understand that. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what we have here. Power over root. So our power is squared, our root is cubed. That is an odd root. We do not need to use a plus or minus when we took that root. But we do have 216, and we have that cube root, and then we're going to square it. Okay, the power is 2, the root is 3. Okay, so if you go ahead and look that up, the cube root of 216 is 6, and then of course 6 squared is 36. Okay, let's go ahead and look at B. I'll write that out here a little bit larger. And we're going to raise both sides to the 5/2 power. Now think about this. Power over root. We have an even root. So we have to have plus or minus when we do take the square root. We don't have to write it right now. We can write it on that next line. Whoops. 5/2. So really we should put that right there right now, but we usually, when we take the square root of it, we will. Okay? So again, we see this 2/5, 5/2. So we have X plus 7. And now we're going to take the square root of 4. So this is plus or minus the square root of 4 raised to the 5th power. Okay, so we have X plus 7 because this is power over root. 5 is the power, square is the root. Okay, and then we have plus or minus 2 to the 5th power, and we have plus or minus 32. Now, we're solving for X, so we're going to subtract 7 from both sides. So we have -7 plus or minus 32. Well, that generates 2 solutions. So we first have X equal to -7 plus 32, and that's equal to 25. And we also have X equals -7 minus 32, and that gives us x equals a negative 39. So there are our two solutions. Okay, let's try a few more of these. Don't forget, plus or minus if we're taking an even root. So, solving equations with rational exponents, x to the 5/4 equals 32. And you guessed it, we are going to raise both sides to the 4/5 power. Now, this is an odd root, power over root. We will not have to worry about the plus or minus. So, we have x to the first power because we planned it that way. And now we have 32 to the 4/5 power. So let's take the 5th root of 32, and then once we find that, we'll raise that to the 4th power. Of course, the 5th root of 32 is 2, and 2 to the 4th power is 16. Okay, let's try this one. This has a little bit of work to it, but it's not too bad. Okay, so we have 3x squared plus 52x, all raised to the 1/4 power. I'll leave a little space, and we have 4. Now, we can now have on the left-hand side, we have to first raise both sides to the 4th power. Why did I do that? Because 1/4 times 4 is equal to 1. So we end up with 3x squared plus 52x equals 4 to the 4th power, and that is 256. Now we have an x squared term, an x squared, and a constant. Everything needs to come to one side of the equation. I'll bring it over here to the left. 3x squared plus 52x minus 256 is equal to 0. And if you go and factor that, it's quite a big one, so you should pause the video and factor that. But you will end up with x minus 4 multiplied by 3x plus 64, and you'll have that equal to 0. So really you're looking for two numbers that equal, I think it's negative 768. It's a pretty tough factoring, but I think you'll get it. And so either x minus 4 equals 0 or 3x plus 64 equals 0. X is equal to 4. 3x equals a negative 64, and x equals a negative 64 divided by 3. So don't forget to ask for help if you need help factoring this one. I'll get you started. So b is 52, a positive 52, and 256 multiplied by let's see, that was a negative 256. So negative 256 multiplied by 3 is a negative 768. So you can work on that and see if you can create those factors, however you factor. Okay, we have 2 more problems with this, and then we will talk about solving equations with factoring. Okay, so take a look here. X plus 200 to the 2/3 power equals 36. We are going to raise both sides to the 3/2 power. Now, when we raise this to the 3/2 power, yep, you guessed it, we have an even root. Okay, so you could put that in front of that right now, or just take care of it when you do take the square root. that is equal to 1. So we have x plus 200 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 36. And once we find that, we're going to cube it. And then we have x plus 200 equals plus or minus 6 cubed. X plus 200 equals plus or minus 216. Now let's subtract 200 from both sides of the equation. Now remember, this generates two different solutions. Since I have the problem on the other problem on that other side, I'm going to try to do it all right here. So x is equal to 200 plus 216, and it's also negative 200 minus 216. And so what you're going to get is a positive 16 and a negative 416. Both of those are our solutions. Okay, let's look at 6b. So I can go ahead and rewrite this as 3x to the 3/4 equals x to the 1/2 power. We are going to raise both sides to the 4th power. Even though 4 is an even number, we're not taking a root. We're just raising it to a power. And there's something we need to be careful with here. 3 gets raised to the 4th power, and x to the 3/4 gets raised to the 4th power. And then this is x squared. 1/2 times 4 is 2. Okay, so 3 to the 4th power is 81. This is x cubed because 3/4 multiplied by 4 leaves a cube equals x squared. So we're going to subtract x squared from both sides. And we can factor out an x squared and get an 81x minus 1. So either x squared is equal to 0 or 81x minus 1 is equal to 0. So x is equal to 0 or x is equal to 1 over 81. Okay, now let's look at these last two problems, which are solving equations using factoring. And we just did that twice so far in this lesson. So the big deal is you cannot divide both of these sides by x squared. You can't divide by a variable. What if that variable was equal to 0? What if x equal to 0? So you're not allowed to divide. It would make it undefined if you did. So what we need to do is bring both of those factors, both of those terms on the same side of the equation. 80x squared is positive on the right-hand side, so it's going to be negative on this side. And then factor out the common factor. And it looks like we can factor out a 5x squared, and we're left with an x squared minus 16 equals 0. And now we can go ahead and say either 5x squared is equal to 0 or x squared minus 16 is equal to 0. So we have x squared is equal to 0, dividing both sides by 5, and x is equal to 0. Now, let's solve this one. X squared is equal to a positive 16. I'm taking the square root, so it's plus or minus root 16. So x equals plus or minus 4. One more of those, and that will conclude this part of this section. Okay, again, we have 12 x to the 4th minus 3x squared is equal to 0. Looks like we can factor a 3 and an x squared out, and we're left with 4x squared minus 1. So either 3x squared is equal to 0 by our zero factor property, or 4x squared minus 1 equals 0. And you could just say x equals 0 for this one. Let's divide both sides by 3. 0 over 3 is 0. And then x is equal to 0. 4x squared is equal to 1. X squared is equal to 1/4. And since we're taking the square root, plus or minus the square root of 1/4. So x equals plus or minus 1/2. And that concludes part 2 of section 2.6.